You have never cried over a game. You told yourself that for years. Then one night, a player steps up to a ball on a white spot 22 meters from goal. The stadium holds its breath. 8 billion people hold their breath. And somewhere deep inside your skull, something ancient and completely irrational takes over. That is not passion. That is not fandom. That is your brain doing something it was never built to handle. Losing a World Cup final does not just hurt. It rewires. It lingers. And for the players standing on that pitch when the final whistle blows, it can leave a mark that science says may never fully disappear. Not because they're weak, not because they didn't want it badly enough, but because your brain, their brain, every human brain, treats that moment as if survival itself was on the line. Here's why. When your team scores in a World Cup match, your testosterone levels spike. Research out of the University of Georgia measured hormonal changes in fans watching their team compete. And what they found was striking. The people watching in the stands who did not kick a single ball showed the same hormonal response as someone who had just won a physical contest. Your brain does not distinguish between watching and doing. It processes the outcome as something that happened to you, personally, directly, in your body. Now, reverse that. The moment the final whistle blows and your team has lost, the same biological system crashes. Cortisol floods in, dopamine collapses, and your brain, which had spent weeks building toward an anticipatory reward, suddenly finds itself holding nothing. Psychologists call this anticipatory grief. The pain is not only about what just happened, it's about losing something your mind had already started treating as real. You were not just hoping to win. On some neurological level, you had already begun to win. And now your brain has to process that as a loss, not of a possibility, but of something it had already claimed. For the players, it cuts far deeper. In 2014, Brazil lost to Germany 7-1 on home soil in the World Cup semifinal. Not the final, the semifinal. And the players did not just lose a match. Several of them later described an aftermath that sounded far less like disappointment and far more like trauma. Defender David Luiz spoke about feeling hollow for months afterward. Goalkeeper Julio Cesar said his sleep was disrupted for a long time. These are not exaggerations from players looking for sympathy. Dr. Alan Goldberg, a sports psychologist who has spent decades working with elite athletes, describes this kind of loss as a genuine grief event, one that triggers the same neurological cascade as losing something real and permanent in your life. Because to the brain, it was real, and it's gone. Here's where it gets stranger. The players who come the closest to winning are often the ones who suffer most. Behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent years studying how humans process loss versus gain. Their findings became the foundation of what we now call loss aversion. Humans feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. But in sport, there's an additional layer that makes this even more brutal. When you almost win, your brain doesn't just register a loss, it builds a simulation, a complete, detailed mental model of the version of events where you did win. It runs it forward, it makes it vivid, and then it has to destroy it. Scientists call this counterfactual thinking. Your mind can't stop replaying the moment everything diverged, the saved penalty, the missed header, the substitute who came on 30 seconds too late. You're not just experiencing the loss that happened, you're experiencing every version of the loss that didn't have to happen, over and over, in a loop that your prefrontal cortex can't easily override. This is exactly why silver medalists at the Olympics consistently report feeling worse about their result than bronze medalists. Victoria Medvec and her colleagues at Cornell University studied the facial expressions and self-reported emotions of Olympic athletes on the medal podium. Bronze winners were relieved. They thought about how close they came to walking away with nothing. Silver winners were in pain. They couldn't stop thinking about how close they came to everything. The World Cup final loser is permanently living inside that silver medal space, except the scale is incomparably larger and the whole world watched. And this changes behavior in ways that last. Research tracking national teams in the seasons following major tournament losses found measurable shifts in how players performed and made decisions. Some became more aggressive on the pitch, taking risks they would have managed before. Others showed avoidance patterns, pulling back from the exact high-pressure moments where they used to thrive. The brain, once it associates a specific type of situation with overwhelming pain, begins to rebuild its threat map. Those high-stakes moments stop being coded as opportunity. They get coded as danger. Psychologist Martin Seligman spent years studying a phenomenon he called learned helplessness. It's what happens when an organism experiences failure in situations that feel beyond its control. And a World Cup final is one of the most extreme examples of an uncontrollable environment that exists. Two teams, 11 players each, billions of variables, one penalty that hits the post instead of the net and changes everything. When your brain can't locate the logic in why it lost, it sometimes stops searching for logic in why it might win the next time. But here's where the flip happens. Some players come out of that loss as the most dangerous, most focused, most driven versions of themselves. Lionel Messi lost the World Cup final in 2014. He went home with nothing. Then he lost the Copa America final in 2015. Then again in 2016. By every psychological model, by every measure of accumulated failure, he should have been finished as a force at that level. Instead, something inside him reorganized. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun spent decades researching what happens to people after extreme loss. What they found challenged everything. A significant number of people who go through devastating failure don't simply recover, they emerge transformed, more self-aware, more driven, more capable of tolerating pressure than they ever were before. Tedeschi and Calhoun called this post-traumatic growth, and it's real, measurable, and documented across athletes, soldiers, and survivors of every kind. Messi won the World Cup in 2022, at 35 years old, in what most people who watched it called the greatest final ever played. He's said since that he needed every one of those losses, that without them, he wouldn't have known what it actually cost. Your brain breaks because it cares, and it cares because this was never really just about football. Anthropologists who study social bonding and tribal behavior point to sport as one of the clearest surviving expressions of ancient in-group identity. When your team walks out onto that pitch, your nervous system doesn't register 11 players in a kit. It registers your people, your tribe, your collective. And losing the final is not a scoreline your rational mind files away and forgets. It's a signal, broadcast into the oldest and deepest architecture of your brain, that your team came second. That signal doesn't know what year it is. It doesn't know what sport is. Evolution didn't build you with a switch that turns this off when the stakes are artificial. The stakes never feel artificial. That's the entire point. So the next time you watch a player collapse on the pitch after a penalty miss in the 120th minute, the next time you see a grown man sitting in the tunnel with his head in his hands, unable to stand up for the trophy ceremony, the next time you feel something in your own chest that you can't quite explain for a person you've never met, from a country you may not even have visited, that's not you being too emotional. That's not you taking a game too seriously. That's 100,000 years of human wiring responding to exactly the signal it was designed to respond to. The question was never why losing a World Cup final breaks the human brain. The real question is why any of us ever believed it was just a game.